The ice cream melted slowly in the cone, as if time had slowed down just in that little corner of Bryant Park. Nathan Reed, 45, was there, standing in line for the cart, his body erect but his soul weary. His broad shoulders covered the marks no one could see. He didn't wear a uniform, but he carried war in every step. New York City pulsed around him with honking horns, shouts, hurried smiles, and he just watched. I didn't expect anything from that day. You just wanted to remember who he was before everything. That's when she appeared. A woman in modest clothing, her cap pulled down, her gestures light. She came in front of him and with an almost childish smile, pointed to the flavor of ice cream she wanted. But when she reached into her pocket, she stopped. Nothing. No wallet, no cell phone. Just the embarrassment of someone who, for a moment, felt invisible. The attendant, impatient, gave him that look that so many people know. The one that labels you, that judges you, that doesn't want to hear explanations. She mumbled something like, "Sorry, I think I forgot." The man in the cart was about to turn away. But Nathan, with a reflex that seemed to come from instinct rather than reason, said in a firm voice, "Leave hers to me." She turned, surprised. Her gaze met his. Gratitude, relief, curiosity. She didn't say her name. Neither did he. And there, without knowing it, Nathan had just paid for the richest woman in the park's ice cream. Have you ever done something simple that changed everything? That woman was Sabrina Lowell, CEO of one of the largest sustainable technology companies in the country, recognized on magazine covers, awarded for innovation. But there, in that park, she just wanted to be Bry. She was running away. Not from the city, not from safety, but from the weight of being someone everyone knew but herself. And what did she find on that bench? A man who had no idea who she was. And yet, he looked at her as if he saw everything. They sat side by side, no names, no titles. The ice cream melted slowly. Birds flew over the trees. The words came slowly, but there was something between them that made it unnecessary to rush. Nathan said little. Bree did too. But the silence was different. It was the kind that welcomes, comforts, and heals. She talked about books. He talked about old music. Both avoided the past, like someone afraid to open a door that will never close again. But you only had to look into their eyes to know. There were deep stories there. Have you ever met someone who, even without knowing anything about you, seemed to understand you? She noticed his hands, marks, scars, knots, and next to his backpack, a small, barely noticeable brooch. Veteran. She didn't ask. He didn't explain. But the respect was there. In the gesture. In the look. In the simple fact of not needing to say it. Time passed. The sun began to set between the buildings. And, even without talking about it, they both knew that their meeting was not just a coincidence. It was as if the universe had given a little push. And on that bench, two tired lives had met at the exact point between the past that hurts and the future that can still surprise. But what Nathan didn't know, what no one in that park could imagine, was that that soft-spoken woman with the melancholy gaze was hiding a secret capable of turning his life upside down. And it all started with an ice cream cone. But what happened next will surprise you. The ice cream was still dripping between his fingers, but Nathan barely felt it. The taste was just a blurry background amidst the memories that now seemed to be resurfacing with force. The woman beside him, who he only knew as Bree, had a calm voice, but her questions cut through layers he struggled to keep hidden. "Do you come here often?" she asked in a light, almost distracted tone. He hesitated, his lips pressed together for a second, as if searching for a bearable version of the truth. "I used to come," he said quietly, looking away. But inside, what he didn't say screamed. He used to come there with his sister, Ellie. On Sundays, after church, with 2 plain ice creams and a book that they shared on the usual bench. It was the only day of the week when he saw Ellie forget for a few hours that she had a degenerative disease that was slowly erasing her body. but it never managed to extinguish the light that she carried in her eyes. Nathan still remembered the last Sunday. She could barely walk, but she insisted on going. She said she wanted to see the leaves falling, like when they were little. He carried her in his arms to the bench, sat down beside her, and read a passage from a book she loved. She squeezed his hand weakly, but determinedly. "Don't forget this place. Never. This place is you too." Weeks later, she was gone. At the military hospital, where Nathan spent more time visiting than caring for himself. He didn't cry. He didn't scream. He just stood on the sidewalk, hours after the funeral, with the same backpack on his back, not knowing where to go back to. Since then, writing letters to Ellie has become his only way of talking to someone who really knew him. Now, years later, he was sitting on the same bench. But the shadow that covered him no longer came from the trees. It was his own. And as Bree talked about a childhood book, he smiled. A polite, almost automatic smile. He changed the subject lightly. "It's funny how the days go by slower when we're not chasing anything." But she noticed. Her gaze plunged deep into his silence. And even without knowing the whole story, something inside her told her that this man was made of disguised wounds. Nathan tried to hide his uneasiness, but beside him, the backpack shook slightly, as if the wind wanted to reveal what was inside. A crumpled envelope addressed to a person who no longer exists, with the date of that very day written by hand. It was the letter of the week, the one he still didn't have the courage to consign to oblivion. He adjusted his backpack and stood up slowly. "I have to go. It was nice talking to you." She waved, a little surprised by the sudden goodbye. "Will you come back here sometime?" He stopped. "Maybe." And he smiled, with an air that only those who have lost can understand. But when he turned his back, he didn't see the way she stared, a look full of questions that were never asked. He walked along the sidewalks of the park, past mothers with strollers, couples of tourists taking pictures, and young people hurrying with headphones on. But none of it concerned him. The city might seem alive, but to him, it was all still noise. Arriving at the small hotel where he was staying for the veterans event, he walked slowly up the stairs. He refused elevators. He said he liked to hear his own footsteps, as a way of reminding himself that he was still there. In the simple room, he sat down on the bed and opened his backpack. He took out the envelope and reread the letter for the 5th time. "Ellie, I sat on that bench today, but the emptiness was still there. I met someone different. I can't explain it. I think she also carries things that she doesn't tell anyone, only in a different way. Maybe it was just a random encounter. Maybe not. Either way, I remembered you the whole time. Your way of seeing beyond what is seen." He put the letter back, took a deep breath. He leaned against the headboard, looking at the ceiling. For the first time in a long time, he felt something strange, a desire to know more about someone. That same night, across town, Bree sat in her quiet penthouse. The city lights streamed through the glass windows, but they did nothing to warm the chill inside. On the dining table were 3 cell phones, 2 open laptops, and an untouched glass of wine. She had returned from the park in silence, without telling the security guards, without telling anyone. She had worn her own solitude like a comfortable coat. In front of her was the card for the hotel where the veterans event would be held. She hadn't told him, but his name was listed as one of the guests of honor. She knew the moment he said, "I used to come." He opened his notebook and typed his name into the company's internal system. There was a file. Medals, history, records. But what caught people's attention was something simpler. A letter filed 2 years ago, written by him, requesting support for a social project to reintegrate veterans. Rejected. She stared at that screen for long minutes. It was strange. A man like that didn't ask for help. He offered it, even with empty hands. And maybe that was exactly why she couldn't get him out of her head. Now she needed to decide what to do. Comment there. Sometimes silence says it all. His hands were in his lap, steady but time-laden. Bree watched them from the side, not wanting to seem nosy, but it was impossible not to notice the details. The marked skin, the slightly crooked fingers, the knuckles jutting out as if each one told a story he refused to repeat. His knees, beneath his worn jeans, didn't bend easily. He avoided the effort. And the look. The look was of someone who hadn't looked at the world the same way since long before she met him. Nathan didn't tell war stories. Not out of pride, but out of exhaustion. He didn't want her to think that was all he was. He knew what it was like to be labeled by a uniform, by a scar, by a medal that no one saw, but everyone judged. She, not knowing what was going on inside, started a conversation about literature. She said that her favorite book was a rare edition of The Old Man and the Sea, autographed by a distant relative of Hemingway. He smiled, then he laughed. And he said the best book he ever read was an old paperback he found in a military hospital, with torn pages and inscriptions written by unknown soldiers. I don't remember the title, but I remember the feeling of not being alone, even when I was. She was silent for a moment. She smiled, but she didn't know how to respond to that. There was no answer that fit. When she suggested they have coffee at a nearby place as a way of saying thank you, he just shook his head. No need. I've already done more than I received, he replied calmly, as if he wasn't expecting anything in return. She smiled again, more out of politeness than understanding. He didn't know, yet, how much that sentence hurt when it echoed inside him. Because behind that simple gesture, there was a whole life marked by imbalance. Nathan was the kind of man who always gave more than he received, not only on the field, but in every relationship he had, ever since he was a child. Ever since the time when my dad would go out for days and come back smelling of booze and broken promises. He learned early on that giving was safer than expecting something in return. During his service, he saw colleagues die protecting soldiers who didn't even know their names. Then, when he returned home, the system embraced him coldly. Help? Only if he filled out more forms than battles. Benefits? Cut little by little, as if dignity had an expiration date. So he closed himself off. Not for lack of feelings, but for too much of them. The world demands resistance, not sensitivity. And he had already lost too much trying to be both. She realized that he was running away from his own merits. He didn't boast about anything. He didn't say where he had been, what he had done, what he had survived. But his body spoke. The marks on his fingers. His rigid posture. The respectful way he listened. That wasn't common. That was a legacy. When he got up to leave, she thought about asking to continue the conversation. But she held back. She didn't want to seem forced. If you come back tomorrow, I can try to remember the name of that book, he said with a tight smile. Who knows? He replied. And he did. That night, the city continued on its course. But for two hearts, time was different. Nathan went back to his room, and for the first time in years, he didn't want to write a letter to Ellie. He felt like if he put it on paper, it would ruin what had happened. It was as if this moment needed to be kept silent, untouched, like a mental photograph. And instead of writing, he just lay down, stared at the ceiling, and let his thoughts wander. Bree, on the other side, couldn't sleep. She spent hours looking at reports that no longer made sense. Meetings scheduled for the next day that now seemed absurd. Her world, surrounded by billion-dollar decisions, suddenly seemed small compared to the simplicity of that gesture. A paid ice cream, a sincere listening, a comfortable silence. She went back to the company system. She searched for his full name. She found the records, and along with them, an old proposal, filed and forgotten by some department that would never know the real value of it. A social reintegration project for veterans, created by him. Simple, direct, real, rejected. In the justification, just one impersonal line. Outside the scope of the company at the moment. Bree felt ashamed. Not because she had been the one to refuse, but because she was part of a world that turned a blind eye to stories like his. She slammed her laptop shut. She took a deep breath. And there, in that silent dawn, he made a decision that would change everything. He wrote a short note. He took an envelope. He asked the driver at dawn to drop him off at the hotel indicated in the internal system. Nathan wouldn't see it until the next day, but by then, she would have already started moving bigger pieces. Right there. Not everything that is worthwhile has a label. The sun was already setting when a boy with a backpack crossed the path between the benches, selling crushed flowers wrapped in newspaper. No one noticed him. Everyone looked away as if he were part of the ground. Except Nathan. He raised his hand discreetly, beckoning the boy over. He picked up a single flower. Plain, red, its petals slightly bent from the heat of the day. He held it out to Bree gently. "So, you remember that someone really saw you today." She didn't react immediately. She just looked at the flower, then at him, as if that sentence had touched something she had been trying to hide for too long. Her fingers touched the flower, as if holding something fragile, almost with guilt. In fact, it had been months since anyone had looked at her like that. Not as a CEO, not as a symbol of success, but as a human being. Sabrina Lowell was tired. Tired of being celebrated for victories she no longer knew she wanted. Tired of being treated with reverence in rooms where no one dared ask how she really was. There, on that bench, with a nearly faded flower in her hands, she felt something she hadn't felt since before her first million. Peace. Nathan noticed. He noticed the way she held the flower, as if trying not to break the moment. He didn't need to know who she was. He sensed that behind that forced simplicity, there was an elegant sadness, and, somehow, very similar to his own. "The city. It swallows us, doesn't it?" she said, as if talking to herself. "Yes, but at least the desert is honest." She laughed. But it was a short, almost sad laugh. Like someone who agrees, but knows they don't have the courage to leave the city. "There, when silence comes, it doesn't lie. It doesn't try to seem like something else," he added. For a few seconds, they were silent. A couple was taking pictures behind them. A skateboarder passed by too quickly. An elderly man was feeding pigeons with a bag of bread. But there, in that bubble between two strangers who knew exactly what it was like to feel invisible, time seemed frozen. Sabrina wasn't used to going so long without checking her phone. She couldn't remember the last time she wasn't worried about deadlines, investors, or meetings. But there, with Nathan by her side and a flower in her hand, she forgot everything. And deep down, that scared her. Because the more she heard his voice, the more she realized what was missing. Truth. Nathan didn't try to impress. He didn't brag. He didn't seem to want anything. And that was more disarming than any compliment. At one point, the wind changed. A light breeze stirred the leaves on the ground. He leaned over a little and took something out of his backpack. A small notebook with an old cover, taped shut at the corners. He opened it to the last page, scribbled something in a neat handwriting, and put it back. She wanted to ask, but respected the silence. What she didn't know is that that notebook was where he wrote to his sister. And in that last note, there was a sentence. "Today, I met someone who really listened to me." Maybe Ellie would have liked her. He looked at his watch. It was already past 5. The event would start at 7. He had to go back, even though everything inside him wanted to stay. She asked if he was staying nearby. He hesitated for a second. Then he said, "In an old hotel, about 5 blocks from here. I just came for a veterans meeting. Something small." She just nodded. But inside, her heart was racing. Because she knew exactly what the event was. It was the same one her company had turned down for sponsorship months earlier. The same one where she would receive an honorable mention, even though she hadn't done anything truly transformative for these men. What he didn't know was that his name was on the list of honorees, and that she herself had signed the protocol without noticing the name that was now in front of her. It was as if the universe was revealing a hidden truth, and she was slowly being forced to look in the mirror. Nathan stood up slowly. The pain in his knee made him freeze for a second. She held out her hand as if offering help. He gently declined. "I can manage," he said with a small smile. She stood up with him. The flower was still in her hands. "Thanks for the ice cream and the conversation." He responded with just a nod. He turned and walked with slow but firm steps, as if he knew exactly where he was going, even without knowing what awaited him. Sabrina stood there, watching him walk away. The sun touched the buildings in the background, and for a moment she felt afraid. Afraid of not seeing him anymore. Afraid of not having done anything. Afraid of hiding, once again, behind the mask she wore every day. But that gesture, that flower, it was like a key. Something inside her opened. And that's when she decided she wasn't going to let it die in silence. Right there. Someone really saw me. The hotel lobby was modest. A stained couch, the carpet with worn edges, a small television playing the news without sound. Nathan went downstairs early, still with his backpack on, ready to walk without a destination. The previous night had left a strange restlessness inside him. Not the kind that presses, but rather nudges. The image of that woman, of the flower, of the way she had looked at him at the end. It seemed to be stuck in his memory, like a note that his mind refuses to file away. The receptionist called him by name. It wasn't common. Most people just said, "Sir," or "Room 203. Nathan turned around slowly. "I have a delivery for you." On the counter, a black box with a satin ribbon. Too elegant for the room. There was no sender, no brand, just an envelope taped to the top with his name written by hand. Firm, clean handwriting. Inside, a few words. "You saw the woman, not the CEO. That's why I'm looking for you." And below, the address of the Avalon Hotel. One of the most luxurious in Manhattan. Penthouse. 20 hours. Nathan held the paper for long seconds. He felt his throat close up. It was impossible not to think about her. But how? Who was she after all? And why him? His chest tightened with that rare mix of confusion and gratitude. He didn't understand what was happening, but he understood that it wasn't something ordinary, that there was something bigger behind it. The box, when opened in the bedroom, revealed a complete outfit. A dark, elegant, finely cut, tailored overcoat. Inside the pocket, discreetly folded, was a handkerchief with the initials BR. Nathan ran his hand over the fabric, almost afraid to touch it. He had never worn anything like it. The last suit he had worn was to his sister's funeral, and even then it had been borrowed from a friend. He looked in the bathroom mirror, which barely reflected himself properly, and stood there for a few minutes, trying to recognize himself. It wasn't vanity. It was strangeness, because suddenly someone saw him with different eyes. Someone believed he belonged somewhere else. And yet, part of him resisted. Being noticed was both a relief and a burden. All his life, Nathan had been used to walking the edges, to serving in silence, to disappearing without applause. And now, a door was being opened by a woman he had known for less than a day. A woman who, by all appearances, was someone the entire world knew. Except him. The clock read 7:48 p.m. when Nathan arrived at the main entrance of the Avalon Hotel. The driver who dropped him off treated him with reverence, as if he had been given direct orders not to ask questions. Inside, everything was immaculate. Marble floors, glass walls, and soft jazz music playing in the background. He felt like an imposter. Each step in the hallway was heavy, as if his shoes were revealing that this was not his floor. But there was something in his posture that no one dared to question. The dignity carried by those who have survived the untold. In the elevator, he went up alone to the penthouse. His heart was racing. His hands were sweating. The invitation was in his pocket, as if he could prove to himself that it wasn't a trap. When the door opened, a woman was waiting for him in the penthouse lobby. It wasn't Sabrina. It was an assistant. her hair tied back, her gaze steady. "Good evening, Mr. Reed. Would you please come with me?" Without another word, she led him down a hallway with dark wooden floors to a large room with glass walls that overlooked the entire illuminated city. Inside, there was only a table with 2 seats. One of them was occupied. Sabrina, was different. No cap, no light clothes. She wore a dark dress, simple but with a sophisticated cut. Her hair was loose, her makeup discreet. But her gaze was the same. He stopped at the door. She stood up. "Hi, Nate," he said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. He took a while to answer. The time between shock and recognition was filled with a silence so thick it seemed to touch the ground. "You?" She nodded. "My full name is Sabrina Lowell." He took a deep breath. He almost laughed. Not in mockery, in disbelief. "That's Sabrina Lowell?" She gave a half smile. "It depends. Which one did you meet?" He approached slowly. He sat down. I didn't know if I was still in New York or in one of those strange dreams that the mind pieces together from loose pieces of reality. She continued, "I didn't want to be anyone that day. Just me. And you were the first one in years who saw me like that. Without labels. Without facade." He nodded, trying to process. She pulled out a thin folder and placed it on the table. "I saw your name on the event list. I saw your project proposal. I read your letter. And I was ashamed. Because I signed the refusal, without knowing who was on the other side." His eyes widened. His face became serious. "I'm not here out of pity or guilt," she said firmly. "I'm here because you reminded me of what's real. And because I believe that together we can do something great." Nathan didn't say anything for a few seconds, but his eyes said it all. That night, for the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to believe that perhaps there was still room for justice in the world. Right there. "I also want to be truly seen." He stared at the glass of water in front of him, as if the answer to everything was there, in the reflections of the light on the glass. He didn't know what to say. Her words still echoed in his head, mixed with the invisible pressure he felt in his chest. Sabrina Lowell. A woman he had known through her gaze, through her silence, through her flower. Now she stood before him with an invitation that carried the weight of a lifetime. "I want you to lead this project, not as a name on the facade, but as the soul of it," she said. Nathan took a deep breath. His palms felt sweaty, his stomach tight, just like the day he'd boarded the plane for his first fight. But this was different. This proposal didn't involve weapons. It involved trust. And that hurt more. Because for years, he wasn't even heard. When he came home, he found closed doors, distracted attendants, cold forms, and looks that treated him like an uncomfortable reminder of what the country would rather forget. He asked for help once. Just once. He left a government meeting carrying the last spark of hope, and saw that hope die when they heard his plan and said, "It's not viable. You don't have the profile to lead this." There, he learned not to ask for anything more. And now, this woman, who could hire any executive, any retired colonel, any handsome LinkedIn name, was reaching out to him. A man with old sneakers, a faded backpack, and a past that few could bear to revisit. "Why me?" he asked, his voice low, almost choked. She rested her elbows on the table, her gaze firm but filled with a rare sincerity. "Because you spoke to me as if I were just one person. And because no one understands the pain of those who return better than those who are still trying to return." Nathan looked away. The glass ceiling revealed the night sky over New York, dotted with lights. But his mind wandered elsewhere. Back to the dark room in the military hospital, where he had read to Ellie from an old book, trying to distract her from her pain. He remembered the promises he had made to her. "If I get out of here, I will do it differently. I will make it worth it." He had, but he had not kept them. Until now. You don't have to answer me today, Sabrina said, softening the moment. But if you accept, you won't be alone. I want to build this with you. The right way. He looked back at her. For a moment, he saw not the CEO, nor the woman in the elegant dress. He saw the girl in the park, laughing softly with an ice cream cone in her hand. And he realized maybe he had been seen that day too. Maybe that simple gesture had opened a window to something much bigger, something he didn't even know he needed to find again. He reached out slowly. He pulled out the folder with the project details. He began to read it, paragraph by paragraph. Each item seemed to have been written from the heart. The proposal called for modular housing adapted for veterans with reduced mobility, psychological reintegration programs, with ongoing monitoring and job training workshops geared toward the real world, not statistics. But what touched him the most was the last topic. It was underlined in blue marker. Every wounded life can be rebuilt if it is looked at with dignity. Nathan swallowed. The silence stretched on. He didn't need time. He already knew the answer. And when he looked up, there was a different lightness in his face. I'll accept, but on one condition. Sabrina raised her eyebrows curiously. I want the project name to be my sister's name. She nodded without hesitation. What was her name? Ellie. Sabrina gave a small smile. Project Ellie. It's done. It was at that moment that the weight of the past finally began to loosen its grip. Nathan felt his shoulders relax, as if for the first time in years, he was walking towards something that truly mattered. The two continued talking for over an hour. They exchanged ideas, memories, fears, and even a few shy laughs. And amidst the plans made there, on the roof of a hotel that seemed more like a parallel world, an invisible alliance began to form. Not by contracts, but by purpose. And even without touching on the subject, they both knew that meeting was just the beginning of a journey that would change the lives of many, including theirs. Right there. There is still a purpose for me, too. He adjusted the collar of his plain shirt as he walked slowly across the cracked concrete courtyard. The place was a decommissioned National Guard base, forgotten by time and the government, now converted into a reception center for homeless veterans. The walls still bore marks from training shots, and the windows, though clean, bore the memory of a time when soldiers trained there returned, often with less steel in their eyes. Nathan walked through the room, as if he knew every corner, but he was still moved by every face. There was a man sitting alone with his back hunched, holding a paper cup of cold coffee. His name was William. He had been a sergeant, but now all he wanted was a dry blanket and someone to listen to him. Nathan bent down, held out his hand, and said nothing. Sometimes all a man needs is to know that someone still sees value in his existence. The transformation that project was bringing was visible. It was there, in the mud of reality, that the Ellie Project flourished. A center with medical, legal, and psychological support. Yes, but above all, a place to listen. Where every story had value, and every pain was treated with dignity. But the process was not easy. Nathan was still moved by the letters he received each week. Some were scribbles from men who had forgotten how to write. Others were simple notes left under doors. Thank you for reminding me that I am more than my past. There was pain in every hallway, but now that pain had room to heal. He visited each unit as if he were visiting brothers. He knew their names, their traumas, their fears. He learned that one of the boys, named Ray, could only sleep if he heard recordings of footsteps in the sand, the sound that reminded him of night patrols in Kandahar. Nathan provided the audio. Another veteran, Marcus, had refused to take off his cap for 8 years because he said his hair had been forcibly shaved off at the mental hospital. Nathan took him to a trusted barber and sat there silently with him as Marcus cried for the first time since being deemed unfit for reinstatement. See, and while all this was happening, Sabrina was not far away. She followed closely, but not in high heels. She traded her heels for boots, meetings for field trips. It was common to see her sitting in the mess hall next to ex-Marines talking about their adolescence, with the tears in her eyes of someone who finally understood that wealth without purpose is just another form of misery. On a golden afternoon, the two returned to the place where it all began, the park bench. It was the same, but everything was different. Tourists were still taking photos. Ice creams were still melting in the hands of hurried children. But for them, that scene now had a different color. Sabrina held between her fingers the dried flower he had given her that day. It was preserved between the pages of a notebook, as if it were a reliquary. "That day you gave me peace with an ice cream," she said, without looking directly at him. Nathan smiled in that restrained way of someone who has learned not to waste words. "And you gave me a purpose with an invitation." They didn't touch. There was no need. The bond between them had grown like silent, deep, unmovable roots. Each one arrived there carrying their own pain, but they left with a new mission. Together, they transformed their own story into a bridge to hundreds of others. It wasn't charity, it was reparation. And even if the world never applauded them like the media applauds big launches or impactful campaigns, they knew. They knew that what they were doing had real weight, soul, consequence. Right there. Purpose can also blossom from pain. If this video brought you some reflection, some good feeling, or even some necessary discomfort, consider subscribing to the channel. Whenever I bring stories like this, it's to remind us that there's still value in looking deeper, into others and into ourselves. Leave a comment saying, "I felt every part of this story," just so I know you were here, from start to finish. And if this video made you feel good, leave a like. Not just for the video, but for everything it represents. Reconnection, justice, dignity. There is another video here on the side that continues along the same lines. Click and come with me. The next story will also move you.